28th, 1997. We're in Columbus, Ohio, the 12th Armored Division Reunion, 51st one. I'm with Harry Freyer today. My name is Charla Henson, and I appreciate you coming and letting me talk to you today. First of all, I want to know your full name, where you were born, and the date of your birth.
That's Harry John Freyer. I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on July the 14th, 1921.
Tell me about your mom and dad, where they came from, your mother's maiden name, and some things about your family.
My mother and father were both from Cincinnati. My father's people came from Germany. My mother's father came from Ireland, settled here when he was in Cincinnati when he was about 16 years old, and raised a large family. My father was an electrician by trade. He spent most of his time in Cincinnati, and he passed away when he was 89 years old. My mother died when she was about 69 in 1959. Then I went through grade school and high school at Purcell High School in Cincinnati. I went into the service in October 1942 and went to Camp Camel, Kentucky in 1942, October the 24th.
Were you drafted, or did you sign up?
I was drafted.
You were drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And I went.
Tell me about the first day at Camp Camel.
Oh, well, of course, it was quite an experience when you don't know what you're getting into at the age of 21. I was, in 1942, I was just 21. And it was quite an experience. I guess a lot of the fellows were the same. They didn't know what to expect getting there. And of course, your gruff-voiced sergeants order you around and make you feel like, why did I ever have to leave home? But it was quite an experience just to go into the training that they had there. Because we were the not the cadre, but the cadre people came in, and we were the original company and division that was in Camp Camel. So we got in on the ground floor, and the barracks and everything were all completed, but there were still some rough spots around. And Camp Camel at that time was very large. They had a lot of ground, taking in all of from Clarksville, Tennessee, and Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Could you tell, they had brought them in from, had most of the officers served in World War I and then come out just...
I'm not sure about some of the officers, except I know our company commander, our captain, was originally a 3C. He was an officer in the 3C camp, Civilian Conservation Corps.
What was his name? Do you remember his name?
Yeah, his name was Eugene Blackford. He was a prisoner of war, and he died, I think, in 1984. We have that in the information upstairs. Someone has that. So.
What was he like? Tell me about it. He was your first captain?
He was the first company commander, and he seemed very, rather domineering. He just looked down on us because he was a big man anyhow, and that always makes it more frightening. But he was fair. He was a good man, and of course I lost track after I went overseas. I lost track, but I do know that he went into action and was captured. So, but and the other officers, I'm not sure just where they came from. We originally had a couple of men from West Point who were, I think I said that in the information I sent to you, that they started out as majors, and they either became lieutenant colonels or full colonels. So they went right up, and West Point, of course, I guess very prestigious. They seemed to get the promotions a lot easier than someone else would. But it was interesting to be in the camp, and of course the time that we spent there, we seemed like we were always doing something. You just didn't have much time. Even though we were, that I lived in Cincinnati, we were not permitted to go home on a pass because it was too far. You were only permitted to go as far as Louisville on a pass.
Well, what kind of training? Were you trained in one area or?
Well, of course, in all the basic training, you start out with the course where you have to run and climb up over the wooden walls and all that, and then you start your training on the rifle range. And a city boy, I was given the job of being a coach on the firing line for some of these boys that came from the country and fired many weapons that I had never fired. But I became a coach on the firing line, which was interesting for a city boy. And we went through all the training to qualify in all the different arms, and all the way up to machine guns, heavy weapons, and so forth. But the training was pretty extensive, and of course, you were not permitted to go on pass or do anything while you were in the training period until that was over.
How long was it between the time that you got there and when y'all did the Tennessee maneuvers? What time span was that?
Well, we actually, we went into the Tennessee maneuvers in September through November of '43. And of course, then from there we were sent. Came back to the camp, and then were sent to Camp Barkley.
Now, what was your specialty? Did they give you a specialty, or were you a tank driver, or were you infantry?
Well, I tell you, I started out in a reconnaissance platoon, and then I went into the 81 millimeter mortar platoon. I got all my training in that, and I qualified in all the weapons and so forth. And so, of course, I eventually was given a corporal rating, but that wasn't until right before we went to Camp Barkley. So, but I really had no particular specialty at that time. Like I say, I was in a 2 or 3 different platoons that trained for, like I say, reconnaissance or 81 millimeter mortar or light machine guns or something like that. Anything that would be used, in the infantry was important. So.
Tell me about the Tennessee maneuvers. I haven't interviewed many people. Well, I haven't interviewed people of the 17th that were on the maneuvers. So, tell me what that was like to do that and to be there.
Well, I tell you, the farmers that lived in that area, they were paid by the government because we would take our big tanks through their farms, and they'd have, barbed wire fences, and they'd just take them down. And of course, any damage they had to be paid for. And, you have teams of, and then you have umpires, like a red and a blue team, and then you'd go through maneuvers about being captured, and the men that are white are the umpire that make the decisions. And what was interesting in my particular case, I was with the 81 millimeter mortar platoon at that time, and you have 3 pieces of equipment that weigh 40-some pounds apiece. The base plate that sits on the ground, and the tripod, and then the barrel, and each one of them weigh between 42 and 44 pounds. Well, we had to take those our squad had to take them all the way through the maneuvers. So what we would do was take a branch of a tree and put it through there, and a man would put it in front, one back on the shoulders, and that's how we carry. Or I was telling one of the fellows who was a tank driver, I said, we used to hitch a ride on the tail end of the tank going through maneuvers, boy, going up and down through those farms and gullies and everything else. But it was better than walking. So it was quite an experience. I think after we were finished with that, we were ready to take a break after those maneuvers because they keep you going all the time.
That was pretty tough weather, wasn't it? Wasn't it winter, or was it?
No, well, I don't remember that we had any problem with the weather. It was in the fall.
Oh, it was in the fall.
It was in the late fall or middle late fall, and it wasn't, the weather wasn't a problem. I don't even remember that it was raining at any time, even when we were there. So we were fortunate for that part.
What kind of ammunition did y'all use during the maneuvers?
Well, they used strictly, blanks that would, and I guess it was a question of the umpires had to decide whether someone was captured because they were overpowered or outnumbered, but it was just strictly blanks that they used. And of course, then we did, I have some pictures up in my album of, they build the pontoon bridges across the Cumberland River to take the tanks. And I have a picture of a tank down in the gully where one went off of there and went down into the gully. But those engineers, they do a terrific job of building the pontoon bridges across, which would be comparable to what they would have to do overseas,
Since this tape is for all posterity, explain to me about the judges, how they decided who was taken captive, who was, were they, did y'all just have kind of little play actions, or was it the whole thing? And how did they observe and decide those kind of things?
I'm not too sure, except that I would imagine that they had a general plan, and then they were told, the umpires were told, what to look for. They had, this is going to be a certain maneuver, and how is that, what is the outcome? And I'm just, not real sure how they judged it, but they were always right there. And they had a white bandana or a white thing around their arm for their to identify them, and it was sort of interesting. And remember getting off on the road someplace, and we were pretty hungry at the time. We were separated from our kitchen in camp, and all of a sudden here's this truck down in this road, and it's an ice cream truck. This man had followed. I guess he figured, well, he could get some business out of the fellows because they were hungry. And there was that ice cream truck. So we didn't see anyone else around but that ice cream truck. It was really something.
Yeah. So the maneuvers lasted four weeks, did you say?
Yeah, I think it was about 4 weeks. The dates I had were from September through October. I'd say it was about about 4 weeks, yeah. September through November of 43. So it was actually longer than that. You don't realize the time, and it's hard to recall that many years back things that happened.
So they got back off the maneuvers, and then y'all were there at Campbell for another period of time?
Yes, I don't remember just how long we were there. And of course, we went to Camp Barkley on November the 8th of 43.
Did everybody from Campbell go to Barkley, or were they sent out to different locations?
Yes, I found out coming to these reunions that some fellows were transferred out before they went to Camp Barkley. In fact, some of the men, at least a couple that I know, were released from the Army before we even went on maneuvers because of their age. They were taken in, I guess on a borderline, and they were just too old, so they sent them home at that time. But men were transferred into different units. I would say the bulk of the men at Campbell went to Barkley, but there were some that were transferred out.
So then y'all went by train, correct?
Oh, yes. And that was quite a trip across from one end of the country almost to the other. And then you would stop in between, and they'd have you get out and do exercises. And besides eating and sleeping, you played cards on the train, and that's about all that you could do. I remember a veteran conductor told us that at that time that if you got on a train at the widest part of Texas, that it would take 4 days to get from one end of Texas to the other. That's
I didn't realize that.
a lot of territory. But it was a long, tedious ride, and we came through Cincinnati going to New York, which was quite an experience because it was, you really felt bad. You could see all your things that you realized were home, and we took off for New York from there. So,
Tell me about the first day going into Camp Barkley. What was that like for you?
well, you know, it's unusual. I guess someone could collaborate this, but I believe that about the first day that we went into Barkley, we always said we brought bad weather with us, and it snowed out there, and they hadn't seen snow for quite a while. So we brought the snow with us. That was about the first or second day we were there. That's one thing I remember. And then going into those plywood shacks that they had, I said shacks for us, and all the sand and everything. I think that was sort of an experience in itself. You know, the sleeping conditions weren't the greatest because, you know, they just had those set up. They were more or less on a fairly temporary basis, I guess.
What kind of heating did those hutments have? Do you remember?
I don't remember now, but I think they had some type of little stove in the center because at that time it was getting cool, and although I think the temperature there, of course, I would imagine that the temperature down there would be warmer. I don't remember ever having any problems with the cold, you know, as far as the temperature is concerned.
Now, were you already in the company, the unit in the company when you got there, or did they rearrange you once you got to Camp Barkley?
Well, you know, originally, I guess sometimes after the Tennessee maneuvers, the 56th 2nd Battalion Headquarters Company, 56th Armored Infantry Regiment, which I originally was in, they broke that down to the 17th, the 66th, and the 56th Armored Infantry Battalion, which are here now, you know. Yeah, they did all that reactivation. They did that, well, actually when we were between the maneuvers and Camp Barkley. So when we went overseas, we had already been separated at that time.
In your unit, did they? Okay, all the men that came from Camp Campbell did not fill up the battalion. So at that point, that's when they brought in ASTP and other men.
Right. Yeah, there was a gentleman at the last reunion, and I did not remember. He was signed to a headquarters company. I did not remember him because he was a replacement that was brought in at Camp Barkley, and I'm sure there were many like that. Because then some men, instead of going overseas, they were transferred out, and these replacements came into our units.
Okay. Tell me about the headquarters company. Tell me about what y'all's job was. Kind of give us an overview of what.
Well, I guess it's like anything else. I would imagine that in our case, the headquarters company, and then they had the ABC companies, we were more or less the top echelon of that unit. And I would say that probably paper-wise, and I don't know just how the Army had adjusted to the fact that we had those different companies, and we were the headquarters company. I don't think that our job, I don't recall that it just seemed like our job was that too much different than the other units. I guess they had a purpose for having it that way, but because I think the main reason that I can remember is that we had colonels, lieutenant colonels, and colonels assigned because of the fact that we were the headquarters company.
Were you sort of the administrative department?
I later got into the personnel. Yeah, I was qualified for everything, but when after I was overseas for a while, I was transferred into a personnel unit, and so I was separated from my men for quite a while. That's why I haven't seen some of these men in 51 years, you know, because I was actually separated from them for a while, and I went to different parts because I went into, actually wound up in Heidenheim, and we were in Heidenheim for a while, and then they transferred us, those who were not eligible to come home because of the number of points. We went to Camp Top Hat, Belgium, and we were supposed to be there and then be sent home for 30 days on a furlough and then go to the Pacific. And of course, the war ended, fortunately. So then I happened to be transferred back up to northern Germany into a Signal Corps unit. And from there I did some work and then came home in 1946 from Bremerhaven.
Okay. On the headquarters, was there a rifle unit, an anti-tank unit? Y'all had the same makeup as
Yeah.
A company, B company, C company, D company?
That's right, yeah. They had,
Okay.
they had reconnaissance, they had certain machine gun, they had, we had our own radio units assigned to us. In fact, I had gone to radio school when I was at Camp Camel and qualified to be an operator on a half track on the radio. I did that for a little while anyhow. But yeah, they all had different, each unit had different groups assigned that they worked with, and became you know, the mortar units and the machine guns and such as that.
Did your captain come with you from Camp Campbell?
Yes, he came to Barclay, and that's when I say, then I'm pretty sure that he went overseas with us, and then, of course, like I say, I lost track of from then, but he was actually went overseas with us from Barclay.
What was the difference between Camp Campbell and Camp Barclay? Was it a higher level of training, or was it about the same kind of thing but just more practice?
Well, I guess, you know, the basic training, of course, because it was the activation of the unit, of the division at Campbell, and I think they were equipped, they had so much territory there that you could go out on a range and fire machine guns into these woods, you know, there was just, and then they had areas where they could use their tanks. I think it was a very large amount of ground there that they had. And I think the training that they had there was a lot different than, because I think they used Camp Barclay. Of course, we did maneuvers in Camp Barclay, but we also, it was more or less, I think, like a stopping off before we went overseas. So I don't think that their facilities there for training were as extensive as it was in Camp Campbell.
Is there anything that stands out in your mind about your time at Camp Barclay, either the town or the experience, or?
Well, I was just, no, I can't remember too much. We didn't seem like we were there that long in my estimation, but I was telling the two young fellows there in the other room that while I was waiting, that we, a couple of buddies of mine, we played tennis in the tennis courts down there in the campus.
At
You know,
ACU or McMurray?
No, at ACU.
At ACU?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And we, I took some pictures, and I was telling them that at that time you couldn't get them enlarged. So I have some in my book upstairs, and this young fellow was telling me, well, I could take them up and they could have them blown up a little bit. But it shows just mostly around the campus there, you know. So, that was one thing I remembered that we did.
Well, when it was time, when you got word that it was time to go to Europe, were you glad? Was it just time to go?
Well, I think everyone was saying, well, what there again, like when you come into the Army, what can you expect? What are we going to expect? Of course, we went to New York, brought bad weather with us there, storms and rain and all that, and before we went overseas. But I think most of the men, just when they got on board ship, they just thought, well, you know, what are we getting into? And I guess it was very, I think it was a very unusual experience for most of everyone.
How did you personally feel as you went across the Atlantic? What was going on in you?
Well, I guess, like I say, it was more or less the unexpected, you know, where we're going to land, what we're going to do when we get there, what kind of facilities will we have, and of course the trip over, being in October, the Atlantic is very calm. a lot different than when we came back. And most of the men slept, they didn't sleep in their quarters even, they slept up on deck, you know, because the weather was good. And we were down on the 4th level, I think, in D deck, so we felt like you were really down in the dungeons, and so we slept out on the deck a lot. And we did not eat very much food because it was an English ship. And when you passed by the galleys, you could smell that mutton, boiled potatoes, and you just lost your appetite. Their food was not, I don't remember hardly anyone eating any food on the way over. I think they ate chocolate bars most of the time.
Oh, do you remember the name of that ship?
It was the Empress of Australia. Yeah. It was a large ship, which I wish we had that size coming back, because we had storms for 12 out of 13 days coming back, so on a smaller ship. But the Empress of Australia was a quite large ship. And of course, we went over in 50-ship convoys because of being having all our equipment. You know, it's not like a troop ship. You go over and they zigzagged and they didn't need any escort, but we had to have escorts because of all the equipment. So we were in a 50-ship convoy.
And then how many convoys were there? Just the one?
That was just, I think we just had the one for ours, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then you got to England. And what kind of experience was that?
Well, you know, we landed there, of course, and it was blackout. And we were in Liverpool, and you come down the gangplank, and you start down the cobblestone streets. And it's dark as can be, and all of a sudden, you hear on the side, you see a lot of figures, and you hear, I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy. And the guy said, oh, get out of here.
That's a great story.
Yeah, that was something. They didn't appreciate their hospitality too much.
Y'all went to, where did y'all end up staying in England?
Tidworth Barracks.
Tidworth Barracks. And y'all were there for?
Well, it seemed like a short time. I'd say a matter of a month and a half or something like that. Yeah, we were about 30 miles from London.
And got your equipment. Tell me, if you're thinking back just before, as you're getting your duffel bag and everything ready, your weapons ready, tell me what all you had that you had to carry with you as you were leaving England.
Well, of course, I think that the duffel bag, that was the largest piece of equipment that you had to sling over your shoulder. And then you have like a knapsack, you have your liner, you have your helmet, your steel helmet, you have your weapon, you have your gas mask, and equipment like that, everything has to be, you have to take everything with you. So, and that duffel bag is quite heavy because you have the big old shoes and all your heavy equipment, your heavy overcoats and heavy uniforms and so forth. That was, I think when we were trudging through England there, I think it was, the fellows were tired anyhow. They probably didn't sleep too well. And what time is the middle of the night, and we had to trudge along with all our equipment.
Did sea rations, how many days of sea rations did y'all, I don't think they were called sea rations, but how much food did y'all carry, how many days worth? Because sometimes you couldn't go back and get and eat.
Yeah, well, I think we carried a couple of days either of sea rations and K rations. Okay. The K rations, you know, were just like crackers and ham and things that were dry food, you know. We carried a couple of days, I guess, with us as far as, for a couple of meals, 2 or 3 meals anyhow, I'd say. Not more than that.
By the time you got your duffel bag and your knapsack and all that kind of stuff, about how much weight did you carry off the ship when you landed in France?
How much?
Weight? What was the weight of what you had to carry with you into battle?
Gosh, I would guess that we were carrying between, I'd say 35, 40, at least 40 pounds, maybe more, 35 to 40 pounds. And I guess it might seem a lot heavier too.
What was your specific duty in headquarters?
Well, at the time when I was really assigned, I was the company clerk. I did all the administrative work for the company. Took care of all their allotments that they had to send home and so forth. And when I was times when we were overseas, and we had to go up to the front lines to take care of, make sure that the fellows, if they needed anything or wanted anything to be sent home or information about their withdrawal from their pay and so forth. So we had to be in touch with them all the time.
On your personal person, what weapons did you carry?
I carried first of all, when we were first in overseas, I think I carried an M1 rifle. And then after we were there a while, we were given a carbine, of course, which was a lot lighter than an M1 rifle. It's hard having to carry it. And it was easier to operate, too. So I had a
how much ammunition did you carry at one time?
We had a belt that probably would have packs of 5 or 6 cartridges in them, something like that. We had a regular belt that we put around our waist. I don't exactly remember how much ammunition was in that, but
did y'all land at a dock, a pier in France, or did y'all have landing?
No, we came across the channel in landing craft infantry, LCIs, and then we had to climb aboard the ship in rope ladders, and that was quite an experience with all your equipment. And you're like in a big barge is what it's like, and the ship looks 5, 6 stories high. But that was quite an experience there.
I know this is a weird question. Was there ever anybody that fell off those things, or had they already trained you how to do that? That sounds like a real job climbing up that
I don't
far.
remember having any problems. I do remember other men telling me about experiences where they were doing that and there was some kind of strafing that happened and the guys were diving off to get into the water, but that did not happen, fortunately did not happen to us. But I'm sure that there were situations where the fellows did fall into the water. Yeah.
When you think about your war experiences and you look back, what is the first day that just kind of stands out in your mind, and what happened on that day?
You mean while I was overseas?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like when y'all are just getting there, and it's kind of like, well, you got to live and you got to survive, but eat and drink and stuff.
Sure.
What is the first thing that you think about as you think, this was my first day of war?
Well, I think when we landed in Le Havre in France, it was raining, and we had to find some type of shelter, and they herded us into a house that had been partly bombed, I guess, and there was hardly any protection, and it was not even like being in a tent because the water just, you had no protection at all, and we were just crouched in this torn down house. But I think that was an experience. I thought, well, it has to get, it probably will get a lot worse, but it has to get a little bit better than this. Yeah. That was the first time I remember.
Okay. What was the first action that you saw against the enemy?
I really, the most that I saw, I guess, was when we were doing guard duty in Alsace-Lorraine, and I just saw a little bit of that from a distance, but I really didn't get that much involved in it because we did some guard duty and all, but there was some infiltration of Germans dressed as Americans coming into our, and that was very difficult because you're walking guard duty and most of them learned to speak pretty good English, and we couldn't differentiate between them. So that was sort of a scary situation. But mostly that's the situation that I was in.
How did you deal? Did you ever find anybody like that?
No. You always think about it when you're walking, because you're you're by yourself, and you're walking on a dark road or something, and you don't know what you might expect. But I really didn't have any where I encountered anyone like that.
Then y'all went on in. Kind of get me from here to Herlesheim. Some of your memories during this period.
Yeah, well, see, at that time, I was separated in the fact that I was more or less in the rear echelon, so I lost track of a lot of the fellows then. Some of the fellows that I just talked to, that were captured in Herlesheim and were POWs, and they were telling me about when they were released and all. And, of course, then you hear about the different fellows that were in our outfit that were killed and or wounded, and you just, you think about those men because you were with them for so many years, and then, of course, you're separated from them. That's the thing that was difficult for me, not to be with those fellows. But that was my job, so I had to be someplace else.
Yeah. So they sent you back, and is that when you started doing more and more of the supplies and getting things to them and all that? There's a word you used a while ago.
I didn't understand what you said.
Okay, when you were separated from them,
yeah.
Then you went back. Were you even more in the administration of getting supplies and stuff to them? Well,
not so much that as just keeping track of. In other words, when we were in Heidenheim, we made out regular payrolls, and that was all done through a warrant officer was in charge, and a sergeant major was in charge of our group.
Uh-huh.
And we kept track of all the allotments, and so that the fellows would have, and they had to send money home or things like that. We took care of all that type of thing.
Now, were y'all in one location then at that point? You were in Heidenheim?
Heidenheim, yeah. Yeah, we were in a trade school. We used their facilities in a trade school. Mm-hmm. And then we took over a 3-story home or building in the city, and we stayed there. And of course, Heidenheim, they had very little destruction because of the fact that I think they knocked out like 2 corner buildings or something, and then they surrendered so that they saved their town because it was pretty much intact, Heidenheim.
Was Heidenheim, did you feel welcomed by the civilians?
The people were yes, they were fairly friendly. I think they didn't show any hostility towards us. I think they didn't have a whole lot to do with us, but that's like being in Florida here, because they're tempered in the southern Germany like that, and the people there speak a dialect. They speak a Schwabisch Gemünd. Instead of 9, they say 9, and so it's different. If you know any German, I knew very little, but if you know German, it sounds completely different. Just like if we were here and there, the people speak a dialect or different parts of the country.
Okay, so how long were you in Heidenheim until the end of the war then?
Well, like I say, I was there until late in '45, and then I was sent to Camp Top Hat, Belgium, and like I said, from there I went to northern Germany before I came home in '46.
In Heidenheim, was that a center? Did they send a lot of? Were any of the hospitals and stuff in Heidenheim?
No, the only thing that I saw there was I have pictures of bringing German POWs, through the town, and they were transporting them through there, and a lot of our vehicles came through, but I don't remember using any hospitals.
Were you able to stay in contact and kind of keep up with the 17th on the front, or?
Yeah, well, we would get, they had critiques, so they would have men come around and give us a daily rundown on what the operation, what they were doing, where they were, So we kept up with it pretty well that way. Be it people from the intelligence and headquarters that would come and talk with us about it, let us know.
When you look back through your experiences in World War II, is it what you expected?
I guess I always said that I wouldn't want to go through what I went through or what anybody had to go through for $1 million, but I wouldn't change the experiences and things that I did have for $2 million, because I think it was something just quite unusual and different. It's something that you just couldn't imagine, things that we went through, and we survived everything. To come home on a ship that you thought was going to break up in the middle of the Atlantic after you went through. You thought, I'm going all through all this, and I may not make it home from here, but I think all in all, it was something that you really didn't expect, but it was just a quite experience. It was hard to describe.
Is there something that you learned in World War II that has changed the way you are when you came back?
Well, I guess the thing that we learned, and after being home and seeing, I do volunteer work at the VA hospital in Cincinnati, and after seeing the men that went through the other campaigns of Korea and Vietnam, that the one thing that we felt like that we had a purpose of being there in World War II, which unfortunately the other men, I think, didn't feel that way, because it was not the same. It was not the same type of a situation. But I think we learned, and I think the big thing that we learned is something that's shown right here in these reunions, is the camaraderie that you find from being with all these men. And I feel like it's like having a second family, because I've been treated so well. I unfortunately lost my wife a year ago in April, but these people here that I hadn't seen for all these years, and their wives, they've accepted me so well, and made you feel like you really have a home when you're with them. And it's just, I look forward to seeing them all the time.
So so the 12th Armored Association has been important to you.
Oh, very important, right. Yes, it has. I was just felt badly that I didn't get the information and know about them sooner, because I was always trying to find out about it, and I just couldn't seem to contact anyone that had the information. Because there were several fellows that were from Cincinnati that I was in service with, and I used to see them periodically after I came home, but they didn't have any information as to getting into the organization, into the association. But I feel like it's so well organized, and people that were in service, they were very much impressed with the way that everything is handled, and how thorough they are in getting information out, keeping rosters and the information. I think they do a tremendous job, and I think that's what keeps us so many together. We had 900 persons at McLean, I think, last year or so. But it has helped a lot. I think it's a great organization.
I have a question. You had mentioned twice, I think, about that ship home, the ship coming home, and how awful the storms were and everything. Mm-hmm. What ship was that? And tell us a little bit about that.
You know, I can't remember the name, but it was a Victory ship. Mm-hmm. You know, the Liberty were 500 passengers, and the Victory were 1,500. And we started out from Bremerhaven, and we stopped at Le Havre and picked up some more men. And after we left there, we had 12 days of storm out of 13. We never went topside, And when we got around Iceland or someplace, they said, well, now you can go up on deck, and you open the hatch to go up, and the deck's completely full of ice, you know, so you can't go anyplace. So you're down there all that time, and some of the men just, they were green from the time they left, and you felt so sorry for them because they just never left their bunks hardly. I was fortunate. I became nauseous, but I never really got that sick, you know. But it's some experience because you just can't imagine how those ships can hold up when they smack down on the water and the big waves, you know. So from November to January is not a good time to be on the Atlantic.
When did were y'all en route to the United States when you found out that, when did you find out that the war was over and you wouldn't be going to the Pacific? And
Oh, well, that was when I was in Camp Top Hat, Belgium.
okay, you were still in Top Hat
Yeah, I
when
was
you found that out.
in Belgium, yeah.
Okay.
Because otherwise, like I said, we would have been sent home for a 30-day furlough and then sent to the Pacific.
Sent on to the South Pacific. When you came back home, where were you released from duty?
From Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I go past there all the time, going up to visit my son in New York, so it's odd to see that. Yeah, we were released from there, and I guess we were there a matter of maybe a day or half a day, and then we got our train to come home from there.
Did you marry after the war? Or
Yes, I didn't marry until 1949. When I came back from service, I worked for the VA in education and rehabilitation, so I decided to go to college. And I went to Xavier University and graduated in 1950. I did it the hard way after being out of high school in 1939. It was quite a challenge, but and then in my junior year in 1949 is when I married. And I started working at Ford Motor Company a week after I graduated, and I worked there for 33 years until 1983.
Ford Motor.
So
What was your position?
I was an assistant traffic manager.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in traffic all the time. It was very interesting work.
Tell me your wife's name and where she was from, and then your children's names, so we'll have this on tape forever.
My wife's name was Annalie Siefker. She was born in Germany, but of course I did not meet her until 1947. She came over here when she was 13 years old. She was the oldest in the family, and her father sent her over when things got pretty hectic in Germany. We married in 1949. We had our first child in 1952, and subsequently had 3 other children. They are now, of course, the top 3 they're in their 40s, and my youngest daughter is 31. I have 12 grandchildren, and my son lives in New York, and my 3 daughters live in Cincinnati. So I'm fortunate to have them with me.
Tell me your son's name and then the 3 daughters' names.
Okay. My son's name is Greg. He has a PhD. He works at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. He has his own lab in molecular biology. He's written 3 or 4 textbooks and lab books. He's quite busy. My oldest daughter is Sheila Umbach. She lives in Hamilton, Ohio, close by here. She has 3 boys, and all teenagers. My middle daughter's name is Andrea Jordan. She has 3 girls and a boy, 1 teenager, and then they go like 10, 8, and 7, something like that. And my daughter Kim, my youngest, has 2 boys, 3 and 6 months. And my son in New York had 3 boys. So it's quite a family.
Good. Well, have I left out any areas that I've missed or didn't know that I needed to ask? Or
I can't recall, as I told you originally, it's so hard to try to remember things, and that many years ago, I guess certain things just stick in your mind, and you recall those things, but I think you covered most of the areas. It was something that I thought was quite unusual, and I mentioned this to one of the men upstairs when we were talking in the hospitality room, that we trained with 37 millimeter guns here in the States, and as soon as we got overseas in England, those guns were obsolete, and we advanced to the 57 millimeter, so those were all left over in Europe. Something that is, just shows you how things progress. And then our tanks, couldn't compete with the 88, so then they started building the Tiger tanks, which were called the M90s, which were able to withstand those, but that was later in the war. But these are things that, how things progress, and you wonder how we kept up with everything. But I think everything was, you covered things pretty well.
Okay, well, I sure appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. I hope I've been helpful in your work.
Thanks so much. Okay.